How's it going, everybody? So, got another interesting game I wanted to look at today. Uh, it's a game in the London system, which, if you've been checking out any other parts of my channel, you'll know is an opening that I'm looking a lot at recently. I like to approach openings as much as I can, not from a sort of brute memorization kind of standpoint. I just don't personally have the time to memorize lines upon lines of theory. I like to go the route of sort of familiarizing myself with opening ideas and becoming accustomed to things through looking at games by like master players, things of that sort. So that's what I'm going to do today. So I picked out a game between. I am going to try to get their names correct. Uh, Bakana Morkiashvili had the white pieces rated 2312, and Merab Gagunashvili had the black pieces rated 2580. So two really strong players. This was in the Georgian Championship. I just pulled this game off of the chess.com database. So a couple of strong players. I picked it because, really high rated players, and it sort of went after, I think, a theme that, at least in my games, I see and can kind of be annoying to deal with. So just wanted to go over that idea. And that idea is specifically what to do and sort of how to think of positions after black plays Queen B6. So that's what we're going to sort of delve into today. So, let's get this going. So we've got D4, D5, Bishop F4, the London system, Knight F6, E3, and then I think a good choice by black. Oftentimes, it seems that black's options that somehow revolve around an early C5, allowing their queen to come out, can cause white some havoc. So it's one of the reasons why I wanted to look at these sorts of ideas. And to review, the reason why this is problematic for white is because their B2 pawn is particularly tender, because their dark squared bishop has developed early. In some lines, it actually makes sense just to give that pawn up with the hope that the development that white can gain will be sufficient compensation. So white plays C3, and then black comes out Queen B6, hitting B2. And we'll look at a few move choices here. So first interesting move choice, I think, when you get these sort of lines, oftentimes an interesting move choice is Knight C3, but we can't do that here, of course, because the pawn is on C3. So another option, which in a lot of variations will pretty much accomplish the same thing, is this move Knight A3. So it looks like here white is just hanging their B pawn, which, in fact, if black wants to take it, they can go ahead and take it. White will jump in with Knight B5, and then Knight B5, of course, threatens C7, forking king and rook. And the only real sensible move for white in this position, or for black in this position, is Knight A6, protecting C7. And now white goes Rook B1. Black takes another pawn. And if they're not familiar with this variation, they think, hey, I'm up all this material. But it turns out the best that black has is this sort of repetition. This is actually a well-known sort of drawing sequence in the London if white wants to go for a draw. If they're playing a higher rated opponent or whatever it might be, allowing black to take on B2 with their queen and trying to get this sort of set up, again, either with Knight A3 or Knight C3, depending on the particulars of what's going on the board. So in this case, C3 prevents knight c3. Another move white might play here would be queen c2, and there are some variations where black could play bishop f5. And the variations where this works are when black's knight is not on b8. But it doesn't work in this case for black because black's knight is on b8. So if white plays this, they're simply losing a piece. So in the other variations, black's attempt to justify allowing white to capture their bishop is just to play queen takes b2 themselves, trying to then take the rook on a1. But of course, in this situation, white's just got queen c8 mate, again thanks to the black knight still being on b8. So essentially in those variations where black's already usually has their knight on c6, that's when black can come out with this bishop f5 move, and white can't take because black will take on b2 and then pick up the rook on a1. So after queen c2, something like g6 by black makes more sense. Knight f3, bishop g7, knight b to d2, castling short, h3, knight c6, bishop e2, bishop f5, hitting the queen again, queen c1, rook a c8. In this position, black is slightly better, essentially, I would say due to their piece activity. You can imagine that especially their c-rook is doing better than white's rooks. Black's bishop on f5 is really nice. White's queen, is kind of consigned to the first rank. So not ideal for white in this kind of situation. Another move white might try would be queen c1, after which, again, bishop f5, knight f3, knight b to d7, bishop e2, e6. And here, again, black is slightly better given his piece activity. So especially his light squared bishop, his queen, and his development advantage, especially noticing the poor placement of white's queenside pieces. So all that to say, those are some options white might consider when facing this move, queen b6. But it really seems like the best way for white to go is to play queen b3. And the idea here is if black takes on b3, we recapture with the a pawn, and we've got a nice open file for our rook. So neither side really wants to capture the other side's queen, especially from a practical play perspective, because you open up the other side's rook. Although computers will tell you in a lot of these variations that it's totally fine. But again, from a practical game perspective, you're not going to see a lot of masters attempting to, or a lot of master games where one side is attempting to take the other's queen unless something really forces them to. So queen b3, and black really just tries to ask white to take their queen by hitting it with c4. White refuses, plays queen c2, arguing now that they've taken away some of the tension black has on their d4 pawn. So if we step back, instead of looking at the move white played in this game, queen c2, but that we look at, again, this move queen takes b6, here's an example. So you get something like a takes b6, knight f3, g6, knight a3, bishop d7, knight to d2, bishop g7, bishop e2, b5, castling b4, c takes b4, knight a6, b5, knight to b4, rook fc1, castling. And if you look at this sort of ending position that we kind of end up with after white takes the queen on b6, it's pretty drawish looking. And the point is that this position resulting after queen takes b6 being relatively drawish, the argument is that queen c2 offers white a little bit more chance to fight for an advantage. And again, that's what white played in this game, queen c2. Black develops their knight, White develops theirs. Black goes after White's bishop, and I think this is an instructive point for people who are newer to the London system, or newer to different openings where they might find their bishop attacked in this way. I think kind of like a knee-jerk reaction that people have is to do something like play bishop g3 here, not allowing their e-pawn to be doubled, but instead allowing black to capture on g3. And I'm sure that's perfectly fine, but it seems, in my kind of deep dive into the London, it seems that all the best practitioners of the London come up with this move bishop g5. And it doesn't look like it's doing anything. Like, it looks like your bishop is kind of out here in no man's land. But essentially what White is doing is White is trying to elicit Black's pawns to come forward, is trying to lure them forward and possibly create weaknesses. And that's what happens here. So we get h6, bishop h4, g5, and really cool idea, which happens in a lot of variations like this. So Black is threatening to take White's bishop, of course, but Black has a loose piece of their own. So instead of trying to kind of passively defend, White can just counterattack with bishop e2. We get a move like we get knight g7 in the game, bishop g3, and now Black jumps back in, insisting on taking White's bishop. e4, White resigns themselves to the fact that they're going to lose their bishop, and that's definitely correct. But Black has spent a lot of moves to round it up, and that's definitely okay for Black as well, or for White as well. H takes g3. So eliciting these sorts of pawn weaknesses has now given White's newly developed rook here, a target on h6, versus if these pawns had been back on g7 and h7. So again, Black's had to spend a lot of moves, and White has ultimately gotten free development of the rook and possibly some targets to go after too, as well as some pawns to sort of latch onto when they might, try to go on the attack themselves. So e6 by Black and bishop g4 by White. So this might have been White's high point in the game in terms of their advantage. So the computer, if you check out the computer's evaluation here, the computer says it's about +1 for White. And this sort of positional advantage, to me, it seems to stem from White's greater control of the center, along with their better piece activity. So especially White's bishop and their h-rook, along with all of Black's pieces, like 5 of Black's pieces, counting the king, on the back rank. From here, though, Black in the game was able to kind of bit by bit whittle away at this positional advantage that White had. And we'll try to sort of see how that happened. I think that's one of the cool things about this game is it kind of exemplifies, I think, to me, one of the instructive points about master games, which is in our games, the games of sort of people at the club level, people 2,000 and less, in terms of their rating, you get a lot of seesawing in terms of the advantage going back and forth. But this game, in most master games, of course, really kind of exemplifies this idea of positional advantage being accrued slowly and bit by bit, and possibly in some cases, as we'll see here, whittled away bit by bit. So really instructive in that way. So Black plays bishop g7. White takes, e takes d5, e takes d5. Now bishop takes c8. White doesn't really see anything better to do, and this totally makes sense. Rook takes c8. And then we get White's, what I would say looks to be White's first major slip of the game. They play knight e2. And I'm not really sure why. Um, I don't really know what the knight is doing on e2. Uh, f4 is taken away. Yeah, I'm not really sure. If anybody has any ideas, let me know. Again, this is a player that is way better than I am, um, and I presume this was a classical chess game, the Georgian championship this year. Uh, so they had to have a lot of time on their clock. But yeah, I don't understand this move. Given that one of the best moves, I think probably the best move, just seems to make a lot more sense to me. This move knight g to f3. So if we look at kind of like a sample line here, um, we get castling by black, and interestingly, white doesn't just cower away and castle themselves, but I think instructively takes the time here to improve their knight, knight f1, because this knight on d2. I mean, what is this knight doing? The d5 pawn is really hampering it. The other knight here is hampering it. So we've got to do something to improve that. And of course, we usually want to improve our minor pieces first. So knight to f1, rook f e8, and this was the point, knight e3. You both improve the knight and you block the check. Queen to a6, castling short. Knight to e7, rook f e1, queen to g6, g4, a6, and here white is doing just fine. They've retained their advantage. A4, a5, rook a to b1, trying to support a b pawn push, trading the queens. F5, g takes, knight takes, g4, knight e7, and here white has retained that initial advantage that they had, and is better due to the potential, I think, for white's knights in this sort of closed position, versus black's bishop here, which is pretty much biting on granite on the long diagonal. And also it looks potentially like white has better prospects on the e-file. So yeah, not really sure why white didn't go knight g to f3. Maybe they were anticipating checks by black after black castled. But again, there was this nice solution, knight f1. If you had played knight g to f3, black castles, this nice solution, knight f1, rook f e8 check, knight e3. So yeah, interesting little positional point there. But in any case, white played knight e2, and now white has ceded much of their advantage. It's close to being drawish in this position. We get castling by black, and here white played g4, which might be their second sort of minor inaccuracy. And characteristically, white is whittling away their advantage through small inaccuracies, not by some big mistakes or even worse, blunders or anything like that, just these small inaccuracies. So white played g4. Better alternative might have instead been to castle. Black might have done something like f5. White tries to jettison their pawn, g4, and tries to break down black's structure a little bit. Rook c to e8, knight to g3, f takes g4, knight d to f1, taking on d4, c takes d4, bishop takes d4. So this is an interesting line, trying to get white's bishop active, and going into a situation where you've got 3 pawns for the piece. Rook takes d4, queen takes d4, just giving it back, not allowing white to take or black to take on f2. Knight e3. So we reached an interesting position here, and admittedly it might have even been hard for players at this level to kind of see the merits of this kind of position. It's a very interesting position where, again, black has 3 pawns and a rook against 2 knights, but again, according to the engine here, engine says this is still pretty drawish, but it might have been a better alternative, like I said, than white's option of going g4. So yeah, sort of small inaccuracies by white. Rook f8. White plays king to f1. Now knight e7, and then we get a move king g1, which again I'm not really sure about. I guess white is just trying to get their king over to h2, but it seems there were better things to do to sort of solve the problem of their h rook. So we'll see a possibly better alternative here. So something like knight to g3 might have been better. So we get something like queen e6, knight to f3, taking on g4. So white goes up a pawn here, knight to e5, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook to c6, rook to e1, rook to d8, queen to d2, d4, and now this important tactical point. Otherwise, if white doesn't have this in this line, they're basically just getting creamed. Rook e4, queen e6, c takes d4, knight to d5, king to g1, rook to b6, f3, and queen to g6, king to h2. So eventually the king does make it to h2, but in a slightly more active way. So black is going to be slightly better here. Let's just throw in one more move, rook to a6, just to make sure black's had a chance to counter. But black is going to be slightly better here due to their piece activity and the comparatively awkward position, I still would say, of white's king on h2. But it looks like this kind of position might have given black, or might have given white slightly better chances than in the game. But again, just a small little inaccuracy. So king g1, queen e6 by black, knight to f1, maybe a little bit too late with this idea of repositioning the knight this way. So black finally converts their positional advantage to a material advantage, and yeah, roughly black's advantage is about -1 according to the engines, essentially aligning with the fact that they're up a pawn at this point. Knight e3, hitting the queen, queen to e6, knight to g3, trying to reposition his knights, queen to g6, knight to g to f5, knight takes f5, queen takes f5, rook c to d8, and then again, odd move. I'm not really sure. White was really trying to figure out what they were doing with their king in this position. I think this might have been a small inaccuracy, but it's hard to say. Again here, black is about, I mean, black has a really nice advantage. Let's just say that, stemming from their better king placement, at least insofar as their king is not being awkwardly getting in the way of their pieces. So noticeably white's rooks are split here, and also of course black has the extra pawn. So a move like a4 instead of this odd move king f1 might have been a slightly better choice. Not like, you know, it's drastically better for white, but we could have gotten a position like this. So rook e6, g3, rook f6, queen e5, rook f d6, and then white's just sort of going back, trying to figure out something to do here. Queen to f5, king to f8, king to g2, and this kind of setup would have been, I'm not sure why this didn't actually appear on the board. This kind of setup for white's king, you kind of want to get it out of the way of your rooks and just not have split rooks, and it really kind of speaks to the king f1 move that white actually played. I'm not sure why they wasted a tempo on that. But yeah, h5, maybe they were afraid of some kind of pawn storm like this. Rook a to b1, rook to b6, looking at the b pawn, queen to c2, bishop to f6, possibly supporting you know, a push of the h pawn. Queen to f5, rook to a6 hitting, rook to a6 hitting a4, b3 supporting a4, but then a trade of pawns, b6 defending the b pawn, rook b5 trying to get active, trading queens, taking on a4, and then taking on h5. So with his bishop, his extra pawn, and pawns on both sides of the board, black is definitely the one with winning chances here, although this is still going to be hard for black to convert, and might have given white better drawing chances than we saw in the game after this, again, sort of odd move, king f1. I mean, I guess the thinking was if they play g3 and then try to play king g2, again, some apprehension about the pawn storm, but if that was the rationale, that doesn't seem to be well founded. So king f1, rook e6, and then we had this move, rook e1 appear on the board. Seemed somewhat innocuous, trying to get some counterplay on the e file, and perhaps this speaks to why white brought the king over to f1 just to support this rook. It was just really awkward. But I would suggest pausing your video at home. It is black to play in this position and black to win. See if you can figure out sort of what the winning move for black here is. So black played in the game the winning move, rook takes e3. And here white resigned in view of this line. So queen takes g6, rook takes e1, king takes e1, f takes g6. And here black has a bishop and two extra pawns, and this is going to be no problem as far as a conversion for black. I mean, I could beat the white player with this kind of setup. Hopefully, I hope I could. But yeah, no, it's hard to say. but yeah, this should be no problem for black. So a really interesting game. I think it really, again, sort of gives an idea about combating this move queen b6 by black, which can be kind of annoying and is kind of a recurring thematic idea that we'll see in the London, or that you see in the London, again, stemming from the fact that white's bishop is no longer protecting the b pawn. So illustrative of what to do with the white pieces. I think this game was illustrative of what to do with the white pieces against this move queen b6, because white, in fact, did build a pretty nice advantage. So the queen b6 move was sort of earlier on in the game. I think it was like move 4 or something, so around this general area, and white was able to build up a nice advantage here. According to chess.com's analysis, they got up to around plus 1.5 or so. I think the other engine that I'm using on this program I'm showing you the game on might have said it was more like 1.1, 1.2. But in any case, white's play out of the opening, which is part of the element of focusing on this game, allowed him to build up a decent advantage. But then through the series of sort of small inaccuracies that we highlighted going over the game, black, the player that was rated a little over 200 points higher rated than the white player, unsurprisingly found these little nuances to chip away positionally at white's position, built up a decent advantage themselves, and then the losing blunder happened with this move rook e1. Black got to essentially win the knight with rook takes e3, and that was it. So I think what we have here is an illustrative game of how white can go about dealing with these queen b6 ideas, which again, you're going to run into if you're playing the London in conjunction with c5. Black basically just going after your kind of weak-ish king side. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you have any thoughts on the game, any thoughts on your own games where you've sort of run into this, ideas you have for combating it, whatever it might be. And otherwise, we'll see you next time for either another game analysis. Maybe we'll play a rapid game, whatever it might be. In any case, have a good rest of the night. Thanks. Bye.